Passive aggression. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Yeah, and you know it, where it's like, well, I mean, it'd be nice if you'd be on time once in a while. Or, okay, I guess we'll see if you show up. All passive aggressive comments. And sometimes it's you that's doing that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Positivity Experience. And let's discuss why and how not to be passive aggressive. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It is your girl, Lori, and I'm excited to do this topic today because so many people have asked for this, and I'm like, yes, it is on the list because next week will kind of tie into this podcast, so it's good that we're doing this one this week. So there's a method to the madness at all times, and yeah, so let's kind of discuss this a little bit because, and before we do, over on the Patreon, as always, you're going to get a worksheet on where to start, but it's going to talk about, it's going to be about you, right? Because I'm always going to put the ownership back on you. Well, I'm not really going to put it on other people. I'm putting it on you, not as a blaming, but as a, hey, let's have accountability of self. And then this way you don't fall victim to somebody else's passive aggression, but most importantly, you address your own passive aggression. And we all have to improve ourselves and we all want to be self-aware without judgment. So that I feel like that's important. And so I'm going to give you some strategies over there. We're going to talk about it. If that's your jam, you can just click the link in the show notes here and that'll take you right to the Patreon, or you can go to patreon.com/the positivity experience with an X, just like this podcast. And before we get into it, I want you to understand that when you are learning new things about yourself and you're becoming more self-aware, it's never to blame yourself. And I feel like we need to start that because when we start talking about manipulation and it being you specific, like it's not about a blame game, but it is about being self-aware so you can correct the behavior, right? So you can do that for yourself first and foremost, and then everybody else that comes along with that is perfectly fine. So I want to talk to you about that. So let's talk a little bit about why some people become passive aggressive. Well, and I'll give you some examples of that here in a few minutes, but there's several reasons, right? Like very often we know a lot of things come from trauma. I mean, but we know that that's a reason, not an excuse. And I feel like that's a really important one because so many people will use the past and different things that they've experienced as a weapon. They'll like weaponize it. And this is one of those. And passive aggression is a form of manipulation. Now, I'm not saying that you're walking around manipulating people on purpose, but I am letting you know passive aggression is manipulation. Okay. So again, don't beat yourself up and be like, oh my God, I'm being manipulative. Okay. We're not worrying about the blame game here. We are just trying to address it. So, there's several things like you can have actually a personality, right? Your personality trait can actually be a passive aggressive personality trait. Yes, it can. It can be a trait. It doesn't mean that your personality goes away. I think people misconstrue working on themselves as like, I'm going to change my personality. It's not necessarily about changing your personality. It's about the awareness so you cannot do it as often, right? Because sometimes and this is specifically for the passive aggressive personality trait. But again, you can work through this if you give yourself that moment and that time to do so. A lot of times people can also use passive aggressive as a coping strategy, not a healthy one, but it's a coping strategy. Well, if I can kind of sort of get my point across without being confrontational, I'll feel better. But like if you're me, I can see passive aggression a mile away and I just distance from it. I'm not going to try to change it. We're good. Right. I'm just not going to do that. So you'll start as we go through this, you'll be like, wow, okay. And this is primarily geared towards, are you passive aggressive? But I also want you to have this knowledge so you can see, oh, that's passive aggression. This doesn't mean that you have to be like, why are you being passive aggressive? Like, don't do that. Like, we're not doing that. This is just education for you to have. And it's going to be a really good tool for you to have mostly about yourself. And then, we'll talk about it. And you'll notice in some of these, you'll be like, oh yeah, I've done that before. That's fine. You're here today. Right. And, you have to understand that, addressing these passive aggressive behaviors, it's going to be you forcing yourself to have open communication, not avoiding that conflict. Understanding yourself, giving yourself compassion and care. And, it's very helpful because that's a big thing that I do with my clients, because so many people are like, God, I just want to stop avoiding conflict. You don't realize that there's a level of manipulation on your end, not by avoiding the conflict, but by the passive aggressive behavior that comes along with that. You see how it's like a snowball effect? So why are some people passive aggressive? Well, feeling powerless, right? Anytime you're in your ego, and I would suggest that you go to my YouTube channel, look under the playlist of Ego Death series. I think it will be very helpful for you to understand your ego. But when you accept the fact that you have no control over 98% of your life, the other 2% is how you see it and how you respond to it. That's literally it. You can't change anything else. So very often when you feel like you're completely out of control, you can use this passive aggressive comments and behavior to control. Like in your mind, you're like, well, I have some level of control over it. It allows you to have this sense of power by almost like challenging people and then making them think, where you're like, got in their head, didn't I? Like, you know what I mean? And so while you're not in control of a lot of things in your mind, that's one reason. So I'm just letting you know, and these are all like proven, like that's that reason where you're like, well, and let me see if I can give you an example of something like that. Okay. So let's say I'm trying to do this off cuff. I don't have anything written down on this part, but I'm very, very privy to like so much passive aggressive, comments and behaviors. So let's say, here's one. So you feel out of control because you don't know if you're going to be invited to the barbecue. I don't know. Let's keep it simple. You don't know if you're going to be invited, but you are pretty sure that other friends are going to be there. And what you really want to say is, hey, is this like open to everybody? Like, would you like me there? Or not, would you like me there? Is it okay if I show up? Usually ahead of time though, if somebody has strong boundaries, you'll know, like, no, it's not open to everybody. But if you're unsure, you would ask that directly. But what you might do is go, wow, now you're texting. Oh, I see that you were at Party City and I saw that you were getting like luau stuff. That looks fun. And good. That's not passive aggressive. You're like, yeah. I'm just having some people over for a barbecue. Okay. Wow. That sounds like it's a lot of fun. That's passive aggressive. Not saying, wow, that sounds like it's a lot of fun. I'm happy for you. Like, oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Fishing for an invite. Fish. When you start fishing for things and you start making these little subtle comments, that's passive aggressive behavior. Okay. Or you ever see, because when I tell you it looks like fun, like it really just looks like fun. I'm happy for you. Like I'm not saying looks like fun, invite me. Because the undertone of that is like, and then that goes into off this topic, a lot of combined. Passive aggressive can also come with attachment issues, right? So if you have this attachment issue, and let's say you had an idea of what you thought a relationship would be like, and now you're fishing to get invited, and then you kind of have FOMO when you're not invited. So you have all of these passive aggressive comments. Now, part of why you very often don't confront it or say, hey, wow, that looks like a lot of fun. Is that something that is open to everybody, or do you have to select people coming over? It's okay. It's okay to say that because it's direct and it's a question, but be okay with the answer. So if somebody goes, yeah, no, it's definitely not open to everybody. Just a few people are coming over. Oh, okay. No problem. That's it. Now everybody understands each other, but are you willing to accept that? No, basically, no, you're not invited is essentially what that's saying. Are you willing to accept that without making it about yourself, without making you say, oh my God, like, are they mad at me? Oh my God. Like now we go into that attachment. So you can see how feeling powerless can spin out of control. So obviously how you not get out of it, but how you work through the passive aggressiveness is be okay with confronting something, but be okay with the answer that you hear back. Because very often you say, well, I would love to know what somebody's thinking, or I would love to know their why. You say that until they give you the why, and then you don't like the why, and then you're like, well, that's not enough. Well, you don't get to do that, right? And again, that's all passive aggressive. Now, expressing resentments, right? When someone feels resentful, like now I'm resentful to you, which we know comes with its own level of ego, right? Holding resentments and grudges hurts no one. Holding resentments and grudges, you've probably heard the saying, it's like drinking poison and especially expecting the other person to die, right? Your resentments are yours to process and to release, right? But if you don't feel comfortable expressing it openly, might resort to that passive aggressive behavior, like indirectly communicating, well, you know me, I know we got in that argument last week. I guess I'm never going to be invited to anything again. What? That's passive aggressive. I don't even pay attention to it. I just let it fall off my back, because the reality is not everybody is going to be on your time or my time or anybody else's time. And you may not be the priority for everybody, and that's okay, right? And you have to accept that. So if you're holding a resentment because somebody said they were busy and you saw them on Snapchat out with friends, well, they're busy. They said they're busy. That is busy. When you ask them to do something. Now, if you ask me to do something, I'd be like, no, I'm going out with Kim and Deborah, whatever. I'm going out with Kim and Deborah. No, I can't make it. Like, I'm just going to be direct and tell you. But some people might be like, no, I'm busy. They're not lying to you. They are busy. And then in your mind, busy, you now start to evaluate what level of busy is acceptable. Are they sitting out by the pool by themselves, just meditating? Well, they're busy. Are they hanging out with friends at the wine bar? Well, they are busy, right? So you got to be careful of starting with that, well, yeah, because then you start that under talking. Like, I know you've seen this, and this is why, again, this is about your knowledge of the areas that you still need to work on, but definitely I know you've seen this, and you might know you do this. You're sitting there and I don't know, you're not getting picked for something, or you're doing this, and you kind of start that under your breath talking. Oh, well, I knew that answer. Well, I mean, God, you're always picking everybody else, like, you know, and you're like, huh? What? Like, you're saying those things and then you're building resentments, and that's not going to benefit you, and it's definitely not going to benefit the relationships around you. Okay. So be aware of that. When you're holding levels of resentments, very often that's going to breed passive aggressive behavior, because you don't hold on to resentment once you've addressed it. And sometimes there's not a resolve to that. You're not going to always resolve things, right? And so you just go, okay, well, I've said my piece, they've said their piece, and it is what it is. And can I tolerate it? Is this a relationship I want to continue to nurture or not? But that's really the only options. But holding the resentment and the grudges, it doesn't harm anybody but yourself, right? And then that goes into the next one. And that's your lack of communication skills, right? Communication skills, that's why they actually have classes for it. That's why they teach it in psychology. That's why, communication is important, because a lot of people in this world will listen to a conversation or have a conversation with you and listen to respond. They're not really listening to you. The moment you say something that either they disagree with or it doesn't align with them, they're seeing your mouth move and they're just like, okay, hurry up. Okay, hurry up. Shut up, because I got to jump in. They're not listening. And listening and hearing are two different things. And that's a huge part of your communication skills. And some people struggle with effective communication skills. It's, for me, it's my profession and I love to talk. It's great. I love to communicate, sometimes very harshly, but I do love to, it's not harsh, it's direct and assertive. And some people that may think it's harsh, but I think that that's the biggest thing is like when you are, if you don't know how to express yourself clearly and assertively, you'll start relying on those passive aggressive comments again. Oh, look who decided to show up. What? Oh, you're saying that because I never come to anything in your mind, or I'm never on time. And so now you want to make some passive aggressive comment like, oh, well, look who showed up. Now I might say that to play around with you if I don't even know that you're coming. Literally, if I don't know you're coming, I'm gonna be like, oh my God, look who showed up. Like, holy cow. Cause I didn't, you know what I mean? But I'll just be like, now, bro, you're not on time. I did not invite you at 1 o'clock because I know your ass wasn't going to be here at 1 o'clock. Like, I'm just going to keep it real with you. And that's the important factor. But when you don't have those communication skills and you can say, because here's the thing, again, the communication skills may come into the insecurities, may come into your low self-esteem, which we know is a huge piece of passive aggressive behavior. When you're passive aggressive, you do not have high self-esteem. That is a fact, right? And as you build that self-esteem and you set your boundaries, you become more assertive. Yeah, you're not going to have that passive aggressiveness anymore because you're going to directly and assertively, not aggressively, but people often will take your assertion as aggression when they're not in the space of being assertive, right? So you're just going to have to accept that. But think of this, right? If you are in that space where you're not communicating and you're like, well, I wanted to come. Now we might be going into a little bit of attachment. Well, right. So let's go back to that first example where I said, okay, you said, hey, is it open to everybody? And I'm like, oh, no, just a few people coming over. Oh, okay. I was just asking because like I really wanted to come over. Okay, you can leave that out. Like now you're trying to guilt trip someone, which we've talked about. Don't try to guilt trip someone based on your own insecurity and attachment, because it's real easy for passive aggressiveness, which is already manipulation, unintentionally often, not always, sometimes it's intentional, but it veers in that direction too. Okay. So it goes into guilt tripping, and guilt tripping is massively passive aggressive. Guilt tripping. Oh, well, I guess, I was just going to have you over. You don't know how long your grandma's going to be here. Stop that. Stop it. That's guilt tripping. If somebody doesn't want to come over for Thanksgiving, they don't have to come over for Thanksgiving, and they don't have to invite anybody for Thanksgiving. Don't expect an invite. You know what I mean? And I think that's the whole thing too, and it's like, here's another passive aggressive comment. Yeah, I guess I'll do it. I always do it. What? Don't do that. I'll do it as usual. It's always me doing it. We've all used that one before. But be aware that that is a level of passive aggressiveness. All right? So you got to be clear in that. Or if you've ever, and this one, because this is the manipulation, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because there's like this desire for control. We're going to talk about that, right? Because that's the feeling powerless versus the desire for control. And so you have to understand, like, that's a very passive thing. And so the desire for control, it's going to be like an attempt to manipulate a situation or other people's emotions without becoming overly aggressive. So it's like a sense of control. Oh, well, let's see. If I tell them I don't feel good, they'll probably take sympathy upon me. Right now we go into victim mode. Do you see how these all go together? Last week was victim mentality. This week is passive aggression, both of which are manipulation. Both of these things are manipulation. And next week, we're going to talk all about your manipulative behaviors that you may not know that you have. And that's okay. But this is important because you have to understand that when you're trying to control things and you're being passive aggressive with it and bold-faced lying about it, that kind of all goes hand in hand. So you have this desire for control. So you're going to start using this sort of manipulative tactic with that. Okay. And I think I know that that's another huge piece of it. So what would the next one be? Attention seeking. That's right. Attention seeking is passive aggressive and manipulative behavior. It's going to be like, oh, this is what I was just talking about. Garnering sympathy. Okay. Garnering sympathy leading into a victim mentality is passive aggressive. All right. Especially when others notice it, oh, okay. I'll just be like, what's your intentions with that? Like, what are you asking me? And then you won't never know what to say unless you really know this is what I need. And so you have to understand that what happens a lot of times when you're not getting the attention or you're not, again, I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. You may have a fantasy of how you want a situation to be, a fantasy of how you want a relationship to be. And it isn't that way. So you're going to try to make it that way by being passive aggressive and by being manipulative and by guilt tripping and things like that. So what happens is if you have this level of underlying anger or frustration, right? Because anger really is just frustration, right? It is going to lead to passive aggressive behavior every single time. And they might not really be fully aware of what you're feeling. Like you may not literally know what you're feeling, but you feel stressed. And then it becomes this passive aggressive, right? Well, that's fine. I'll invite you. You're not going to show up, but that's fine. That entire statement was passive aggressive. Okay. Oh, that's fine. No, it's fine. I'll invite you. You want to come? I know you're going to say no, right? Let me guess. You're not peopling today. No, I'm not peopling today. I knew it. Okay. I'm just going to be like, yeah, that's right. I'm glad you knew it. I'm not doing it. See, you have to understand that what you're asking for, you're not asking for. And you're allowed to be disappointed. Nobody's saying you're not allowed to be disappointed or frustrated. Hell, that's a normal part of the human brain and a human reaction and anatomy and how we work as human beings. That's fine. The problem is when you, A, don't accept things as they are, B, don't clearly communicate it and be willing to hear the response. I want to go back to that because your communication skills are going to be key here. To change passive aggressive behavior, and we're going to talk a lot about it over on Patreon, but to change passive aggressive behavior is to start working on A, your emotional regulation, B, any attachments and insecurities and self-esteem that you have, And C, clear and assertive communication. But with that means you have to be willing to hear what the person says and then don't spiral out of control, right? And be like, well, what did they mean? And you might not be ready for that. All right. But when you're doing this, and to stop with the passive aggressiveness, I think it's pretty clear, at least for people who I know and know personally, you're going to know exactly where I'm coming from. You're not going to be like, what did she mean by that? I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. And you tell me exactly what it is. And that's great. That's what breeds and builds long-term relationships. Okay. So, let's say ambiguity. Okay. That's a big one, because that word is always hard for me to say. And kind of like deniability, right? That's a huge piece of passive aggressive behavior. And it's like where you have like this plausible deniability. You're kind of like denying it if you're confronted, claim innocence instead of like, oh, well, I did that, but like, I just left out the details. Well, that's passive aggressiveness, right? You don't, it's not necessarily a lie, because you're not really like lying about anything, kind of like a backwards lie. But if you omit details, that's seriously passive aggressiveness and massive manipulation. All right. So you got to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to do? Because then you're going to start seeing, well, you're trying to get control again. You're trying to take control over something. We just had that. That's the desire of control. And it goes into that frustration and anger, right? And so I think that's the important factor for you, is that you have to remember that that's what's happening. So just because you don't give all the details, where now suddenly people might need you around for these extra details, that's passive aggressive behavior. It's passive aggression. Okay. And then if you go, well, yes, but you didn't tell me everything. Well, yeah, because, I just trying. Okay. What? Now you're just skirting it. You're denying it. Like you're doing this passive deniability. I'm very ambiguous about the whole thing. Yeah, but I have text messages. Yeah, but you just took them out of context. No, they're pretty direct. And to side note, yes, people take text messages out of context. That's why if it's important, you have a verbal conversation about it, because people will attach a tone the way they think that you're going to say it, how they feel that day. A lot comes into play here. So you want to be really, really careful of that. Right? Because, when you have that frustration behind this sort of like, well, it didn't work out my way, then you get called out, and then you don't really know what to do. So then you get defensive, because defensiveness is a massive thing of passive aggression, massively. Right? And so, just because you want something doesn't mean it's going to be the way you want it. And I think that goes into control and not having control and wanting control and feeling out of control. And that's why victim mentality, passive aggression, both are very manipulative behaviors, and you don't always intentionally do them. So if this sounds like you, don't beat yourself up. Like, we're not coming down on you. You want to be aware of it so you know where to work. Because this is all attached to an underlying issue. This isn't like, well, I'm just passive aggressive today. It just randomly happened on a Monday. Like, no, there's a deeper rooted reason behind it. Okay. And I think that's a big one. And like, oh God, I know you've seen this. Oh my God, I know you've seen this. Do not be this person. Perceived helplessness. Oh my goodness. I know you know somebody where someone feels helpless or unable to influence a situation. So the person feels like they cannot influence the situation to go the way that they want it to. And then they're going to resort to like passive aggressive actions as a way to indirectly change. Well, I don't know that I can do that. Like, I don't think I can drive there. They can drive there. Yeah, but like, I'm not sure. And, I'm not sure if I'm going to get lost. And oh my God, like now we start going into a little bit of like, not a victim. Well, there is a victim mentality, but more like just a perceived helplessness. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can do that. Like, now you don't want to go the other direction either and be like, I don't need any help. I can do everything myself. Well, that's a big trauma response too. That's hyper independence. And I did that for a long time, not anymore. My God, I'm very fast to ask for help, and I want to be the least educated in the room. If I'm not hired to do something, like I want all of the help, all of the information, give it to me, like give it to me now. But I wasn't always like that. So you want to be careful of going from perceived helplessness to I got it all, but then you don't want to say, well, this is what I want, but I can only get it from this one person. Like that, you got to be careful. Because again, passive aggression is often kind of interfused, I think, a little bit with like infused with your attachment styles. So you got to kind of remember that, because that's why I said it's a deeper issue. And so the perceived helplessness, and I'm going to talk to you about some strategies. Like I said, most of the strategies are going to be on Patreon, but we are going to talk about a few strategies here on when you may be on the other side of that, because this is specifically so you can be aware of your own actions. So you can work on changing those behaviors to have more fruitful relationships with others, but most importantly, build your self-esteem. When you're not passive aggressive and you're direct and assertive, now we're building that self-esteem that you're always like, how can I build this self-confidence? Well, you're going to have these conversations, but again, you're going to have to hear what people say without going into this weird, like, fear of rejection and fear of that. Like, people have every right to say how they feel. And then this way you don't have to guess. You don't have to dance around it. You don't have to do some hat dance where you're like, well, I don't understand like what's happening. And of course, that other reason is your insecurity, right? Anytime that you have low self-esteem or insecurity, you're going to use passive aggressive behavior to gain some sense of power or superiority. Like, you ever see how, like, again, and this goes more into attachment, but let's say you have a childhood friend like me and Kim, right? We've been childhood best friends for, 47, 48 years, something like that. And I'm starting to lose track. Like, no one's going to replace that time. Historically, you can't undo time. Historically, most of my friends don't try. I mean, my friends aren't going to try to do that because it's just not a thing. It will never happen. And so that doesn't mean that I don't have amazingly close and healthy, amazing friendships now. I absolutely do. But I'm saying if you are insecure and you want to be on that level, you're never going to get on that level, because historically you can't be 48 years in the making 5 minutes ago, right? But not accepting that could possibly turn into some passive aggressiveness. Oh, well, that looks like fun. I wonder if I could come over. Like, that's what I'm saying. You got to be really, really careful with these sort of statements, that you make. And it's like, oh yeah, here's one. Here's a good one. I wrote a few things down on my sticky on comments. If you see somebody go on vacation, right? And let's say you're at work and somebody's on vacation and you hear somebody go, well, that must be nice to just take vacation whenever they want. That's jealousy. Jealousy is tremendously big for passive aggression and manipulation. That's right. Jealousy is, baby. When you're jealous of a situation and you start sitting in comparison, you start doing all of that, you start doing this weird sort of metamorphosis into a little bit of passive aggressiveness, because then you can't be happy for somebody because you're seeing a story that you don't know. And you guys know I use this example all the time. I took 6.5 years to save for my pool that I've had almost 6 years now. But if you didn't know that, and you didn't know I made a lot of sacrifices so I could have that, but it took me a long time. 6.5 years is a long time. But you wouldn't know that if you just saw me on Instagram sitting by the pool. You'd be like, oh, must be nice to have a pool. Well, yeah, because I really busted my ass to get this pool. But that's another thing. When you're sitting in comparison, you got to be careful, because there will trigger passive aggressive behavior, passive aggressive comments. And even when you're saying them to yourself, anytime, no one is ever going to talk more poor about you than yourself. Nobody. I don't care who it is and how abusive they have been. They are not going to ever talk any worse to you than you do yourself. And you got to be careful, even if you're being passive aggressive and you have these things. That's why you have these journals, the 5 journals. Go out to my YouTube, watch the 5 journal series. You have them so you can dump all of these insecurities in there. This is great. Bring it up. Be honest. Put words to it. Be honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself that you're being passive aggressive, manipulative, or guilt tripping and all that stuff, if you're not honest with yourself, you're not going to be able to fix it. Don't judge it. We're not judging you here. Do not judge yourself, and do not judge anybody else with it. So this is important, because I want you to sit in that space to where you can understand that when you are feeling jealous and you're feeling in comparison and all of these things, it's not necessarily going to change the narrative. And when you become clearer within your own self, your boundaries, you're not being passive aggressive. You can spot passive aggression from anybody 10 miles away, anybody. And just don't feed the bear. You don't have to, Do I like to sometimes call out the behavior? Yes. But on Patreon, I'll tell you more of a, not a kind way, because that's not what we're going for here. We're not going for an aggressive way, but a direct way. What did you mean by that statement? I mean, I guess I can tell you that now. It's, what did you mean by that statement? What is it that you're trying to actually say to me? See, that's assertiveness. Somebody comes at you. Well, what are you trying to say? Well, what do you mean by that statement? Right? That's not passive aggressive. I'm asking you directly, what did you mean? That's as direct as I can be. Well, what did you mean by it? Well, I mean, no, I don't know. That's why I'm asking, what did you mean by it? So you have to realize that when people carry this passive aggressive behavior, and you can start seeing it going to the victim mentality, and it starts going into something, and then they start, oh my God, like, I don't even know why you're friends with me. How are you friends with me? I'm such a mess. I don't mean saying that to your bestie. I mean, that's fine. It's whatever. But, oh, did I screw something up? Are we going to be friends again? Like, that's passive aggression. I just let it go, because it's not, it just, especially in my line of work, right? Because my God, like, most people who come to me are not coming to me with full self-esteem until later on, because I take you from one place, we get you the self-esteem, and now we start growing you into your business. It's not just mental. It's also like, hey, I'm coaching people with their businesses and business coaching. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that comes with Lori, right? And I just don't tell you all of it, because you'll see it when you get it, when it's time, right? And I think that's the important factor, is that you have to realize you have to be patient with people, but you don't have to subject yourself to it, right? Like, that's why you be direct. Let people know. Boundaries prevents people's passive aggressive behavior towards you. Now, they may try. Correct. They may try. You don't feed the bear. When people start with the kind of the sort of the, oh my God, what was me factor, they're trying to break down those boundaries. When you hold your boundaries, the passive aggressiveness will start to dissipate. Now, that relationship may go away, that person may go away, but the relationship will be stronger if it in fact stays. And so it's important that you understand this, because this isn't just for interpersonal, well, it's all interpersonal skills, but like, isn't just for personal relationships. At work. Don't be passive aggressive at work. Be direct. Don't be passive aggressive with your parents. Be direct. Assertiveness is not aggression. But again, and I can't emphasize this enough. I want you to be direct. I want you to be assertive. I also want you to be able to receive people's assertion without taking it as rejection. So, and the reason I've said that like 3 or 4 times is because I've seen it happen. They're like, yeah, it was great. Like, I came out, I did it good. And they told me the tone. I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. Great job. And they're like, yeah, but then, they were like, well, yeah, but I don't want you to come over. And I was like, oh my God, I was devastated. And I was like, well, but why? Well, because I wanted to go over. Yes. But did you ask them? Well, yeah. And they said no. Okay. So did you guess if they wanted you over or not? Well, no, they told me that they didn't want me over. So why are you attaching your worth to their invite? Why do you see what I'm saying? So then we would go deeper behind that. So that's sort of how I work. I hear what your issue is, and I'm going to go behind that, and I'm going to go behind that, and I'm going to go behind that until we can find the wound. And then we start healing that wound. And then all of the other things that align start to change. So with that being said, we're going to hop over to Patreon, but let's start being more direct and assertive and less passive aggressive. Check it out.